God says the night had fallen heavy over the small town, the kind of darkness that felt alive, whispering through the air as if it carried secrets no one was ready to hear. He sat alone by the window, staring at the reflection of his own face in the glass. The rain traced paths down the pane, blurring the outside world, but his mind was clear, painfully clear. He could feel her presence even in the silence. She wasn't there, not physically, but her energy lingered around him like a song he couldn't stop humming. He loved her. He had always loved her. But his heart wasn't free. There was something, or someone, standing between them. Not a person, not entirely, but a hold, an old promise, a tether made of guilt and memory. He couldn't name it, but it lived in him like a ghost. Every time he tried to move forward, it whispered reminders of what he had once said, what he had once vowed, what he had once feared to lose. Love should have been simple, but for him, it was layered with shadows. She, on the other hand, moved through life with quiet faith. She didn't chase him or demand his time. She simply believed in him, believed in something higher guiding them both. On most days, she didn't even know why her heart still held space for him. The world had told her to move on. Her friends had told her to forget. Yet, deep inside, she felt that their story wasn't finished. Something divine was still unfolding, even in the silence. When she prayed, she didn't ask for him to love her back. She asked for truth. She wanted to understand why a connection so strong felt trapped in delay. And somewhere in the unseen, heaven heard her prayer. The days grew longer, and his restlessness deepened. At first, he blamed work, pressure, life. But when he tried to distract himself, he found no peace. His mind kept circling back to her, not because of desire, but because of something deeper. Around her, his soul felt seen. And that frightened him. He wasn't used to being seen beyond his roles, beyond his charm, beyond the image he built to survive. She looked at him and saw the man behind the armor. And though he loved that feeling, he also feared it, because he knew he couldn't stay open for long. Not yet. There was a secret he carried, a past he never spoke about, a connection that had once felt like love but had turned into obligation. He owed someone his loyalty, or at least that's what he told himself. Years ago, when his world was falling apart, someone had helped him rebuild. She had stood beside him, offering comfort when he had none. In his gratitude, he mistook dependency for destiny. He told himself that staying was the right thing to do, that leaving would make him ungrateful. But as time passed, he began to feel like a guest in his own life. He had tried to break free before, but every attempt ended in guilt. The person from his past knew how to use his empathy as a leash. Tears, memories, promises, they all worked like chains. He couldn't bear to be the cause of someone's pain again. So, he stayed. And every time he looked at the woman he truly loved, he hated himself for it. But God had begun to stir the ground beneath him. Subtle at first, small disruptions, moments of truth disguised as coincidences. He would dream of her voice calling his name. He would see signs, her initials, songs they once shared, even strangers speaking words that pierced his heart like prophecy. It was as if the universe was conspiring to remind him that his heart could no longer live divided. One night, unable to sleep, he walked outside under the pale glow of the moon. The sky was heavy with clouds, but a single star broke through, faint, yet stubbornly bright. He closed his eyes, and in that quiet, something inside him broke. He whispered into the darkness, "Why can't I just let her go? Why can't I move on?" And in that silence, something answered. Not in words, but in a feeling, a warmth that moved through his chest, a knowing that filled him with both pain and peace. The answer wasn't that he couldn't move on. It was that he wasn't supposed to. There was still something unfinished between them, not romantic longing, but spiritual alignment. His love for her wasn't the problem, his fear of freedom was. The next morning, everything began to shift. The person who had held control over him sensed the change immediately. Her tone became sharper, her affection more forced. She accused him of being distant, distracted. And for the first time, he didn't apologize. He simply listened, quietly realizing that he had been apologizing for wanting to breathe. Meanwhile, the woman who loved him from afar began to feel strange waves of emotion she couldn't explain. Sometimes, her heart would race for no reason. Sometimes, tears would come without sadness. She didn't know it, but their spirits were moving in sync again. When he began to release what bound him, her soul felt the vibration of that freedom beginning. Days turned into weeks. He started spending more time alone, questioning everything he once believed about loyalty, love, and self-worth. He realized that he had spent years trying to fix others because he was afraid to fix himself. The truth hurt, he had been a prisoner of his own guilt, not of anyone else's power. As this realization deepened, his connection with God grew stronger. He stopped running from the silence and started meeting it. He would sit in stillness, and for the first time, he began to listen. The divine didn't speak in thunder, it spoke in whispers, in synchronicities, in peace that followed the truth. One night, he heard a line in a song that said, "Love doesn't live in fear." That was it, the revelation. Love that required him to shrink, hide, or apologize wasn't love. It was control. And he realized that staying bound was not an act of kindness, it was an act of denial. That night, he wrote a letter. He didn't send it to anyone, but he poured everything into it, his apologies, his gratitude, his goodbye. It was the closure he had been too afraid to give himself. When he finished, he burned the letter in a small dish, watching the smoke curl toward the sky. As the last ember faded, so did the heaviness in his chest. Somewhere miles away, she woke suddenly from a deep sleep. She didn't know why, but she felt light, as if something had been released. Her heart, which had carried the ache of waiting, felt strangely calm. She whispered a quiet thank you to the heavens and went back to sleep. The next few days were different. His smile came easier. He began to notice beauty in small things again, the color of morning light, the sound of wind in the trees, the way his heart didn't ache when he thought of her anymore. Not because he didn't care, but because he finally understood that love was never meant to be owned or feared. It was meant to flow freely, without guilt. And then came the moment God had orchestrated all along. Their paths crossed again, not through planning, not through coincidence, but through divine timing. It wasn't dramatic, it was natural, like two rivers meeting where they were always meant to converge. When their eyes met, there was no rush, no need to explain. There was only recognition, quiet, sacred, infinite. He didn't have to tell her that he was free. She could see it. The heaviness was gone. His energy was open, unguarded. He looked at her not as someone who owed him patience, but as someone he finally deserved. They talked for hours, not about the past but about truth. He told her how he had lived under the illusion of obligation, how he had mistaken fear for responsibility, how he had learned that love built on guilt can never grow. She listened, her heart soft but strong, and when he finally fell silent, she smiled through tears and said, "Now you understand. That's all I ever prayed for." In that moment, something holy filled the space between them. It wasn't the return of an old love, it was the rebirth of something pure. God had taken what was broken, what was delayed, and turned it into divine timing. The real reason his heart hadn't been free wasn't because of her, or the one who once controlled him, it was because he had yet to surrender to truth. Once he did, everything else followed. The night sky outside mirrored their stillness, vast and calm. He reached for her hand, and it didn't tremble this time. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, she saw no fear in his eyes, only faith. He whispered, almost to himself, "I think I finally get it. God didn't keep me from you. He brought me back to me." She smiled. "And now he's brought you home." There was no need for promises. The story itself was the promise, a testament to what divine love truly means, not control, not fear, but freedom, honesty, and grace. And as dawn began to break, the light that touched their faces felt like a blessing, soft, radiant, and endless. The past was gone, the chains were broken, and the truth had been revealed. His heart, once bound, finally belonged where it was always meant to, not just in her hands, but in the freedom of love guided by God Himself. The morning after their reunion, she sat beside the window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The sky was pale gold, the kind of dawn that felt like it carried meaning. She watched the light spread across the floor and thought about how strange life had been, how waiting could feel like both a burden and a blessing. For months, maybe years, she had woken to the same quiet ache, a feeling that something precious existed just out of reach. But that ache was gone now. In its place was stillness. She remembered the nights when she would pray for him, whispering his name as though God needed reminding. Sometimes she would speak, sometimes she would only cry. And yet, every time she poured out her heart, she felt peace return like a tide. There were seasons when she thought she was foolish to keep believing, and then small signs would appear, his favorite number, a song from nowhere, the scent of rain on an ordinary afternoon. They weren't proof, but they were enough to make her stay hopeful. She had written him letters too, pages she never sent, words folded neatly and hidden away. In them she had confessed things she couldn't say aloud, her longing, her anger, her forgiveness. When she read them now, they didn't sting anymore. They felt like prayers written in ink, testimonies of a woman learning to love without fear. Her friends used to tell her she was too patient, too forgiving. They didn't understand that her waiting wasn't about chasing him, it was about listening to God. Somewhere inside, she always knew that love could not be forced, that hearts caught in fear must free themselves before they could truly love. What she wanted wasn't possession, it was alignment. In her dreams, she often saw him walking through fog. Sometimes he would call her name, sometimes he would just stand there, searching for something invisible. Those dreams used to confuse her. Now, she understood. He had been finding his way back to truth. She hadn't been dreaming about his absence, she had been witnessing his awakening. She started noticing changes in her own world too. The same lessons that shaped him were shaping her. She began speaking her truth more clearly, setting boundaries, choosing peace over performance. It was as if God was telling her, "You cannot ask for a healed partner while you are still healing your silence," so she learned to speak, to say no without guilt, to say yes without fear. Her relationship with faith deepened. Prayer stopped being a request and became a conversation. She didn't need to plead anymore, she simply listened. And in that listening, she realized that God had been teaching her to trust not in timing, but in truth. Sometimes she would sit beneath the old oak tree near her house, a place where she had often gone when her heart felt heavy. She would close her eyes, breathe, and imagine light surrounding them both. Not to pull him toward her, but to free him wherever he was. She knew she couldn't do his healing for him. All she could do was hold the space for when he was ready. That faith changed her. The woman who had once waited with tears now waited with peace. The one who had once longed for a message now found comfort in silence. She understood that love's truest test wasn't distance, it was surrender. When they met again, she saw it instantly. The light in his eyes was different. It wasn't the kind of light that comes from excitement, it was the calm kind, the kind that only appears when someone has met truth and chosen it. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She just smiled and let the stillness speak. That night, after he left, she returned to the oak tree. The moon was high, silvering the leaves. She whispered a thank you, not just for him, but for everything that had brought her here, the loneliness, the unanswered prayers, the lessons that had seemed cruel at the time. She realized that without them, she would never have learned what divine love truly meant. Love wasn't about who showed up first, it was about who arrived whole. And now he had. She closed her eyes and saw a memory, the first time she had ever prayed for him. It was years ago, when he was still lost in another life. She remembered asking God to keep him safe, to let him find joy, even if it wasn't with her. That prayer had come full circle. Because the moment she stopped needing him to return, he finally could. The next morning, she woke with clarity. She didn't know what the future would look like, she only knew that it was guided. She wrote one last letter, not to him, but to herself. She thanked the woman who had endured, who had believed, who had stayed gentle in a world that told her to harden. She folded the paper, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it inside her Bible. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a message from him. "Thank you for never giving up on me," it read. You were right all along. I just had to see it for myself, She smiled, not because of the message, but because of the peace behind it. This was the completion she had waited for, not a dramatic confession, but a quiet knowing that everything had unfolded as it should. The journey had taught her that God's timing doesn't rush, it refines. Every delay had been protection. Every silence had been growth. Every prayer had been a seed waiting for its season. And now that season had come. In the weeks that followed, they began to learn how to exist again in the same world without the weight of the past pressing down on every word. It felt strange at first. The quiet between them was no longer filled with guessing or regret, it was simply quiet. They didn't need to reach for each other constantly to prove connection. It was just there, steady and warm, like sunlight through the clouds after rain. They met often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks. They talked about ordinary things, work, memories, the small moments that made up their days. And beneath those simple conversations ran something sacred, an unspoken awareness that they had both been reshaped by something greater than themselves. He told her one evening, "I used to think love meant holding on. Now I know it means letting God lead." She nodded, understanding more than words could express. What they shared now wasn't built on need or fear, it was built on truth, on the lessons that had stripped them bare and taught them how to stand whole. There were still moments when the past tried to echo, when old guilt brushed against his peace like wind against a flame. But instead of fighting it, he prayed. Instead of withdrawing, he spoke. The difference was simple but profound. He no longer ran from truth. And she, who had spent so long waiting in faith, no longer waited, she simply walked beside him. Together they began to serve others quietly. They volunteered at the community center, worked with young people who were learning to trust again, shared stories of how brokenness can become a bridge to grace. They never spoke of their own past in detail, they didn't need to. Their presence carried the message, that love healed by God becomes a vessel of peace for others. At night, when he prayed, he often thanked God not for giving her back, but for making him the kind of man who could love without fear. She, in turn, thanked God for teaching her that real love doesn't trap, it trusts. It doesn't demand understanding, it offers patience. The two of them had become reflections of the lessons they once struggled to learn. One evening, they sat on a hill overlooking the town. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in amber and rose. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she said softly, "Do you ever think about how different everything would have been if we hadn't gone through it all?" He smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes. But then I realize we wouldn't have known what real freedom feels like. We had to lose our way to see how God was guiding us all along." The air was still, the kind of stillness that felt like peace instead of emptiness. She rested her hand on the grass beside his, not holding, not clinging, just being. He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. There was gratitude there, deep and quiet. He said, "I used to think I had to fix everything before God could bless me. But it turns out, He blesses you in the middle of the rebuilding. That's what you were for me, grace in the middle of the storm." She shook her head gently. "No," she said. "Grace was what healed both of us." They sat there until the light faded and the first stars appeared. The sound of crickets rose, the earth exhaled, and everything felt exactly as it should be. When they stood to leave, he looked up at the night sky and whispered a prayer of thanks, not for miracles, but for understanding. God had not given him what he once thought he wanted, he had given him what he truly needed: truth, peace, and a heart that finally belonged fully to love. And she, walking beside him, smiled at the thought that sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that lead us back to ourselves, and through that, to each other. They reached the road where they would part ways for the night. He paused, looking at her with quiet reverence. "Whatever comes next," he said, "I trust it. I trust him." "So do I," she replied. They walked in opposite directions, the glow of streetlights flickering softly between them, and for the first time, distance felt like connection, not separation, but balance. They were no longer bound by fear or time. Their love had become what it was always meant to be: free, faithful, guided by God's steady hand. Somewhere beyond the noise of the world, heaven must have smiled. Because when two hearts learn to love through truth and faith, the story never really ends, it simply continues in peace.